Happy Tuesday night, folks. What if I told you that the fall of North Korea will be unlike the fall of any government in the history of the world? You see, that's because it's also set up unlike any dictatorship in the history of the world. And here's why it hasn't happened yet, despite all of the poverty and all of the economic difficulty that this country has faced. The reason why it hasn't even happened yet, the reason why there's not an uprising within the North Korean people, it doesn't take much to explain, but there are a couple steps to it. First of all, these people don't know anything about the outside world. It's called the Hermit Kingdom for a reason. They do not know what it's like in even their neighbors to the immediate south, South Korea. They do not know what life is like in China to their immediate north. They do not know what life is like, particularly within the United States or anywhere in the West. They know nothing about life outside of their little hermit kingdom. So without any other country to reference themselves to, there's not going to be any dissension because they have nothing else to compare themselves to. Which is why it was kind of risky for Kim Jong-un to send soldiers to support the Russians in Russians in Ukraine from his North Korean People's Army, because by sending them to Ukraine, those soldiers now know what life is like in a different country. They now know what Wi-Fi and what remote internet is like. They know the internet now. The only internet in North Korea is a very, very tightly knit and controlled internal network. And mobile phones are only connected to this specific type of internal closed circuit, quote unquote, internet. However, once they took their phones with them into Ukraine, they were able to obtain SIM cards that enable them access to the World Wide Web. So most people in North Korea have no idea about anything from the outside world, outside of the occasional smuggled in tape from the South. Of which, of course, being in possession of anything like this is worthy of being executed in the North. So they don't have really any idea of what it's like on the outside world. Although from some reports I'm seeing, it is slowly changing because of these smuggled in tapes and things like that of shows on the outside. The other reason why there isn't any internal dissension within the country is the fact that anybody who is close enough to the dictator, Kim Jong-un, who could potentially rise to a position of power and build a power base to potentially dethrone him, usually actually winds up getting executed themselves. His uncle is basically exhibit A of this. Yes, this man had his own uncle executed, all because he had enough of a power base from when he was guiding a young Kim in the early stages of his time as supreme leader. So yes, internal dissension is not going to be an option. That is typically how a lot of these dictatorships typically fall. Now, you're thinking about another possibility, a military invasion from the outside. Well, as much as North Korea likes to saber rattle their nuclear weapons, they know, Kim Jong-un knows his history, and he actually knows very well excuse me, that he cannot actually take this type of action at all. North Korea has at most 50 bombs, nuclear bombs and warheads. The United States has several thousand, as does the Russian Federation. Kim Jong-un knows that if he were to take military action against the Western countries, and specifically the United States, he's likely toast. At very bare minimum, his grip on power does disappear. So he's not this stupid. And so he's not going to do anything that's going to trigger a military invasion of the North Korean mainland, including dropping nukes on the United States. It is rumored that out of these 50 bombs, that a couple of them could theoretically reach the United States on a missile as part of a nuclear armed warhead. However, again, if Kim Jong-un does this, retaliation would likely destroy his entire country. You don't want to mess with a country that has several thousand nuclear warheads at its disposal, because that country is capable of blowing up every single square inch of your entire little country. So a military conquest is out. The United States and South Korea and most of the regional neighbors don't have any motive to invade North Korea as it stands. The South doesn't have any interest in doing it because they actually believe that North Korean citizens are their own people. So there's not any real desire on them to invade themselves. North Korea back in the 1970s built tunnels underneath the mountains that would have allowed millions of men to cross the border and invade the South. However, it's a different world now. Yes, they could theoretically win a land war. That much is pretty much established and has been for a while. The North Korean People's Army has close to 2 million sworn soldiers. They have one of the greatest concentrations of military versus the population in the world. A ground force from the Korean People's Army is quite formidable. That said, I don't think they have the stomach for what it would take to assert military conquest over the South. Again, the North just has the South has too many weapons, and the Americans have too many nukes available. Kim Jong-un's main priority, utmost priority, is maintaining power over his country. He cannot maintain power over a country that would no longer exist and would have nothing. He would have nothing left to rule. And the only other neighbors that North Korea has, as far as any sort of a military conquest is concerned, China doesn't have an interest in invading. They actually have an interest in maintaining the status quo, because right now the North is their buffer between the U.S. influenced South. So that's an impossibility. There's a very teeny tiny, about 10-mile long border between North Korea and the Russian Federation. On the extreme northeastern corner of the North and the extreme southeastern tip of the Vladivostok district in Russia. There's never going to be a war between those two. In fact, obviously, as I just mentioned, the North is sending soldiers to fight for Russia in Ukraine. So that border is not going to see a military conflict of any kind. So then you've got all of those possibilities ruled out. And you're thinking to yourself, how would this country fall? How would the Kim dictatorship fall? You can't really have an internal dissent. You can't really have any a military invasion happen. Well, there are several possibilities that have been considered. The most effective and credible one possible that I have seen presented to this point is called the money bomb. The South Korean currency, of course, on an international level is very weak as it stands. The North Korean won trading rate with the American dollar is negligible. However, within the country, of course, the North Korean won matters for everything. Now, beyond that, here's how this works. Somebody out there prints billions and billions of North Korean counterfeit won and shoots it into the country. So then you exponentially increase the money supply overnight. Of course, when you increase the money supply overnight, what happens to the value of that money? It plunges. All you have to do is look at Zimbabwe in the early 2000s with their inflation rates and their government endlessly printing money. The effect here would be the same. North Korean citizens will suddenly have to carry wheelbarrows worth of cash just to buy a loaf of bread, just like they did in Zimbabwe. And so this inflation would actually be the trigger to the internal dissent, even with the regular citizenry not knowing anything about life on the outside. This alone would lead to even further widespread starvation than even that occurred in the 1990s in the so-called arduous march, as their propaganda calls it. This would actually be worse. And discontent against the Kim dynasty that would uprise from this type of a monetary attack on the country would be unlike anything that could ever be done through political means. Because you take your food away from people, and I mean it's already happened on a grand scale in this country before, but the scale in which this would present itself is completely and totally, absolutely unprecedented. So this is one way that North Korea would actually fall on itself. The other thing is, we look at Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, of course, overplayed its hand with many numerous blunders. The Kim dynasty could theoretically commit similar blunders in overreaching and overestimating its own power. There's no indication that this can happen, though, because I think Kim Jong-un is very well versed on what these mistakes could be, and would do everything that he can to avoid committing them. The Korean People's Army is not a military designed for attacking other countries. It is designed to maintain control of his own people. And it functions in military parades, showing various equipment, and as a propaganda tool to help him maintain control over his own people. It is not designed to be a fighting force against other nations. In the nuclear saber rattling, he does not have enough bombs to effectively take on anyone in the world. It's to the point where the neighbors, the Chinese to the north, have effectively ordered him to tone it down. Because if there's one thing that China hates, it's inconsistency and instability. This country has always, always, always thrived on stability and consistency. Kim Jong-un has at times presented his country as the opposite of that, chaotic. If he overplays his hand in this regard, and overplays his position and presents himself as chaotic and aggressive towards his neighbors, there's one other option I can see happening. Make sure you're sitting down when you hear this, because it's going to be a shocker. In a situation where Kim Jong-un overplays his hand and is over aggressive towards the rest of the world at large, the situation that could arise is that Kim Jong-un is actually taken out by Xi Jinping, the supreme leader of the People's Republic of China. But as a move to preserve China's role as the supreme superpower on the Asian continent. An unleashed Kim Jong-un would threaten this in almost every way possible. Xi would not be willing to tolerate this at all. And so we could see a situation in which Kim Jong-un is removed by Xi, and a puppet replacement is installed at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party. Similar to how North Korea was founded to begin with in 1948-9. Kim Il-sung, the grandfather of Kim Jong-un, was actually installed by the Soviet Union as a puppet leader himself. This is what launched the Kim dynasty. So we do have an oddball precedent for this, where China comes in and installs a puppet ruler and eliminates and dethrones Kim Jong-un. It's crazy, but this country was not founded on anything remotely close to normal. So the end of the country, because the country is so unusually built, its demise would actually come very unconventionally. I believe it would either be the money bomb tactic or Xi doing it himself, because he demands stability on the Korean Peninsula, and he demands a reliable buffer between himself and the Western influences, which combined include the U.S. military and the South Korean government. So yes, the end of North Korea could easily come as a result of direct action by Xi Jinping. I really don't hope I don't get censored for this, but I just didn't, I can't really think of any other possibilities. But it will not happen due to internal strife, other than that caused by a flooding of counterfeit currency into the DPRK. So I hope you enjoyed this one. It's been interesting to imagine, but an unconventional dictatorship can only fall in an unconventional manner. And I believe those are your two best options that are available. So anyhow, that's it for tonight. Hope you had a good Tuesday. Getting ready for Hump Day tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow, and peace out, homies.